Good Friday to you. I'm Devin Dwyer, live at ABC News headquarters in Washington. Welcome to the briefing room, joined here by Catherine Falders, our White House producer, Justin Fischel, our senior supervising producer on Pennsylvania Avenue. We have the whole team today here. We should say cheerio on this Friday. This is basically a UK kind of a day. We got Wimbledon going on. We've got the president over there creating waves across the pond. He just touched down in Scotland. He's headed for a weekend at his golf course there, Turnberry, perhaps a couple rounds of golfer in his future ahead of the summit on Monday. And you're seeing live picture now of the president's team arriving, Air Force One touching down. Of course, all of this unfolding today in split screen with another major development in the Mueller investigation. Robert Mueller now revealing a 10th indictment today. 32 individuals now have been indicted in this thing, and the president calls it a witch hunt. But clearly, this grand jury of peers finds that maybe not.
Today was all Russians that Mueller indicted. Critical here is that they're all 12 of them members of the Russian military. So unlike the last indictment of Russians, which were private companies and individuals, this is an undeniable link to Putin's government itself. And that is something that the president has sort of been, cautious to accept. Just 2 weeks ago, he tweeted that the Russians are still denying they had anything to do with this. But this is a link to the Russians.
And to break it all down, senior Justice reporter Jack Date is with us. He was there at the Justice Department this afternoon for the surprise press conference with the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Jack, break it down for us. Give us the top lines here. As Justin was mentioning, this is an indictment of 12 Russians, and they're a little bit different from previous indictments about their meddling in the United States election.
That's right, Devin. It's an incredibly detailed 29-page indictment of these 12 Russian individuals. As Justin said, these are people who are involved in the main intelligence directorate of the Russian Federation, the GRU. This is the sort of top line of Russian intelligence services. And it's incredibly detailed because we know not only specifically who did it, it names the 12 Russians, it tells us where they did it, specifically what street addresses they worked out of, the physical buildings where they did it. It tells us where the servers were in some cases that they used to carry out this attack. It tells us in detail how they did it. It tells us how they used spear phishing attacks and malware to get inside the DNC. And even when the DNC detected the intrusion, they used other forms of malware and other countermeasures to stay in those servers persistently without detection. And so the incredible detail and the forensic work that went into this, to creating this indictment, is really, really breathtaking. And we know specifically when some of these events occurred and the manner in which they occurred. It's incredibly detailed in that respect as well. And I think the overall of this is that we see, as Justin pointed out, a direct link to Russia. And we know what they stole. They stole things like the Democratic field operations plans for the 2016 campaign, things that are incredibly valuable as political intelligence.
And Jack, one of the other things that was striking here was that the indictment didn't mention any Americans. And Rod Rosenstein was very careful to point that out. He also said there's no evidence in the indictment that these 12 and their activities by hacking John Podesta's emails, changed the vote count. But that was very carefully worded language, as you know.
Exactly. It's not an accusation that's made in this indictment. The indictment at various times refers to persons known and unknown. And so it gives you the sense that in some cases they may know who the Americans were very well, and what they haven't done is present any sort of criminal charge. So they may have been either witting or perhaps unwitting, not knowing that the Russians were involved in this, but we're still in communication with people posing as these shadowy figures on the internet. As Guccifer 2.0 was one of the sort of monikers created to represent these Russian hackers.
And as the president, you see there, is getting into the motorcade in Scotland, Justin, as Jack was mentioning, no Americans here, but that doesn't mean that Mueller couldn't name and indict Americans for involvement in this in the future.
Oh, sure. And that's the president's biggest fear. His singular focus in responding to this indictment so far today is saying this doesn't involve Americans, this doesn't involve me, and this doesn't talk about collusion. You know, he didn't congratulate them on work well done and getting these.
Right, instead, at the press conference, he called it a rigged witch hunt.
Right. He called it a rigged witch hunt, and you're right. The White House is also capitalizing on the fact that the hacking didn't affect the election results, sending out bullet points of what Rod Rosenstein said in his press conference. But Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, is also tweeting that this is good news for all Americans. He says that no Americans were involved in this. But he's not necessarily.
But they were hacking
right
the election,
with that.
so it's not exactly good news for the Americans. It's evidence that the elections were going to happen. And this is one of the things that he was asked at the last question at his press conference today. Will you tell Putin to stop messing with our elections? He looked back and said yes, and he continued to walk away. It's the big question.
And in fact, our Pierre Thomas put that very question to Rod Rosenstein and said, wait a second, why are you releasing this indictment today?
All right.
A lot of people have that summit in mind. Here's how Rod Rosenstein answered that question.
Quick question for you, sir. Number one, the timing today on the eve of the president's meeting with Putin, can you talk about that? And also, just today, the president described the Mueller investigation as a witch hunt. Your response.
Timing, as I mentioned, is a function of the collection of the facts, the evidence and the law, and a determination that it was sufficient to present the indictment at this time. As I mentioned, I did brief the president. With regard to the nature of the investigation, I only comment on the evidence.
So he's only commenting on the evidence. Is this all an accident, Justin?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you're looking at it from Trump's perspective, this gives him a little leverage on the way in. Gives him something to sort of say, hey, gives him a one-up on Putin going in. He's big into that, having a little. You saw him do it. It's like a pattern. He did it with NATO. He went in there. He had something to complain about. Puts them on the defensive.
All right. Our thanks to Jack Date for his reporting today on this, and to pick up where we were leaving off, Catherine. All of this sort of flows right into the big summit in Helsinki, Finland, on Monday. This is when President Trump will sit down. Today he called it a loose meeting with Vladimir Putin. He says he'll bring up the meddling. But he's done that before.
He's done that before, and kind of in a lackluster way, right? He says, well, he says he didn't do it, and I believed him there. He's already been fielding questions from this at NATO. He says, all I can do is say, did you do it? And don't do it again, right? So it will be interesting to see with this news how the summit changes. Is it a one-on-one meeting? Are there more aides in the meeting? Democrats on Capitol Hill are calling for him to cancel the meeting. I don't think that will necessarily happen, but the timing surely is curious, as one person just described it to me as a bargaining chip in some way, in terms of the news dropping today and how it will play into that particular meeting.
Now, Vladimir Putin wasn't the only subject of the press conference today. He was standing alongside British Prime Minister Theresa May, whom he sort of disparaged the night before in an extraordinary interview with the Sun newspaper.
Stunning.
Absolutely stunning. Many people saying he knifed her in the back. Let's bring in ABC News foreign correspondent Julia McFarland, who is over in London. Julia, you've been following the blowback to all of this in London. I think people, from just the headlines of the paper, as far as we could tell across the pond here, the people in London were appalled by that interview.
Exactly, Devin. I mean, what can I say? I mean, this interview with the Sun newspaper I've got right here, May has wrecked Brexit, is what landed on people's doorsteps and across newsagents all this morning. That story dropped last night, just a few moments after 10 o'clock last night. And in a way, has sort of doomed this presidential visit from the start, because it has completely overtaken the narrative. When MPs from both sides of the political spectrum woke up this morning, the House was kind of united, supporting Theresa May and in condemnation of President Trump's visit. And it just dominated the agenda today. And of course, what Foreign Office mandarins, diplomats, and the president himself at the press conference earlier today with Theresa May, what everyone was doing was damage control, trying to President Trump. He rode back on the revelations in this interview where he said that Theresa May had wrecked Brexit, that a US-UK trade deal was now, that she had killed every chance of it because of the strategy that she has published recently. And of course, Theresa May is the Brexit Prime Minister. This is her legacy. This is something that she has been struggling with and she will be remembered for. And these torturous negotiations with the European Union, of course, are going to be that much harder for her when one of the big carrots in the Brexit campaign before Britain took to the polls was that we can have trade deals with whoever we want, particularly with the US. And for the president of the US to say that her strategy has endangered that has just put all kinds of that has just poured gasoline on the fire of these very, very difficult negotiations for her.
Yeah, she really looked like she was fighting for her political life there at that press conference, fighting quite hard. Meanwhile, the president, as you said, was doing some damage control. Complete 180 from what he told The Sun. Let's take a listen to his response to a question about that interview.
Well, maybe I'll go first because I didn't criticize the Prime Minister. I have a lot of respect for the Prime Minister. And unfortunately, there was a story that was done, which was, generally fine, but it didn't put in what I said about the Prime Minister. And I said tremendous things. And fortunately, we tend to record stories now, so we have it for your enjoyment if you'd like it. But we record when we deal with reporters. It's called fake news.
All right. Well, we have fake news official, as we like to call
That's
him,
right.
here with
That's what
us,
they call me.
Who
Also
is the author of Fact Check Friday on ABCNews.com.
That's right.
But
Check
let's do a little bit of a fact check. The president says it's fake news that he criticized Theresa May.
It's not right. He criticized heavily Brexit, which, as we just heard, is her sort of signature achievement. And stunningly, he said he thinks her main political rival, Boris Johnson, her former foreign minister, who just quit this week, would make a great prime minister. It would be great to take over her job. So if that's not a criticism, I'm not sure. Now, he didn't call her any names, but, this was serious, damaging political criticism.
And he came out and semi-apologized, right? He said, well, I apologize, but I said all sorts of good things about you. So why an apology if he didn't criticize her in the first place?
And his press secretary had to apologize just after that story broke.
So we have a very, very highest level special relationship between the two of
special relationship
between the two of us. They may have a highest level special relationship, but man, there were protesters by the thousands in the streets of London today who are not so happy that Donald Trump is even nearby. Julia, you were out there tracking some of that today. Give us, we're looking at some of the pictures, give us some of the flavor of what you heard out there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a real carnival sort of spirit. President Trump, he evokes all kinds of emotions from a lot of people in the UK. But remember, of course, we are at the end of a sort of 3-week heat wave. So there were thousands of people who skipped the day off work today. But what was really ominous is just this evening it started pouring with rain for the first time in 3 weeks. But before the heavens opened, the skies were sunny and there were tens of thousands, I think it's safe to say, of people marching down the streets of London, marching past Whitehall where Parliament is. There were all kinds of signs, a lot of very creative slogans. There were people, very, very British slogans. I saw signs saying, down with this sort of thing, shut up and go away, which is a ploy on the Defense Secretary, who was singled out for saying that he thinks Russia should shut up and go away recently. There were but there were also people from all kinds of causes. There were signs, trans against Trump, the Jewish resistance, people who feel very strongly about specific Trump policies that have been widely reported here in the UK. I mean, this is unlike any other presidency. Frequently here in the UK, domestic politics takes precedence over international news, but we frequently see news from America making top bulletins, things like the separation policy, things like the so-called Muslim ban. People are very aware of what is happening on the other side of the pond, and they feel strongly about it.
And the president said today he knew that these views were being aired in the streets, but he felt welcome nonetheless. He, of course, met with Theresa May, got the royal treatment. Then he met the Queen herself today, and boy, were those pictures something to see.
That was really neat. We thought he wasn't going to. He did show up on time. There was some question about that to the minute because she was standing there in the hot sun. Everybody was like, "Oh my God," because he has this history of being late. But he was there, and they walked alongside each other, and they had a
And we're seeing those pictures now, the 92-year-old Queen meeting, she's met 11 of the past 12 American presidents, everybody but LBJ. During her reign, and she's still
kind
kicking.
Of directing him.
He did kind of eclipse her at one point, which was sort of awkward. He walked in front of her, and we lost her for a second. There it is. We lost her for a second.
And there's a bit of protocol involved here, and I understand, Julia, to bring you in for one last round here. The Brits are very protocol conscious, and we know they're watching this very closely.
Yeah, I mean, royal protocol is something on its own. I mean, we're seeing these pictures, all the pomp and pageantry, and that is, of course, sort of the epitome of British tradition. And, of course, royal protocol is written in stone. And President Trump will have been briefed by his officials several things, such as you do not walk in front of the Queen. You will always at least a few paces behind. And, well, that didn't quite work out according to plan. But President Trump, these images of him, the Queen, inspecting the Coldstream Guards, one of the oldest sort of guards of the British military, is exactly the image that he wants beamed back to the UK, back to the US, this kind of pomp and pageantry and recognition, not just of the office that he holds, but also of himself. But there were a few differences. For example, there were no other members of the royal family there. President Obama, on his last visit, when he also met Prince William and the Duchess of Cambridge, and Prince George, and President Bush as well met the Duke of Edinburgh. It was just the Queen here today, which, you can't ever really take signals from that, but I think perhaps he would have been disappointed not to have the whole royal family out to greet him.
And we know that it was a moment the president had looked forward to on this trip, perhaps his favorite moment of the trip so far, maybe more so than ruffling feathers. He's at his golf course.
I should clarify one thing we said. We said that the president and Sarah Sanders apologized about what he said, but he doesn't apologize easily. He clarified what he said, and he said he never criticized her, but he did not, I should point out, apologize.
All right, fake news official getting that on the record. We appreciate that. Julia McFarland in London, thank you for that reporting. And much more to come on this trip. There's still a weekend ahead at the president. He just gave a big interview, Catherine, on Air Force One.
He gave a 30-minute interview, according to Piers Morgan, on Air Force One. If it's anything like the interview we dealt with yesterday, who knows what could come out of that? He may be clarifying a little bit more. But yes, he's supposed to have a couple of days of downtime ahead of that major summit. I'm sure all the focus, though, these 2 days will be on Russia.
And we'll have live coverage of that summit right here on ABC News Live starting Monday morning, 6 a.m. Eastern Time. It's going to be a big Monday to kick off the week with those two world leaders meeting in Helsinki. We know you guys will be tracking that. We hope you will, too. Download the ABC News app so you can follow us all weekend long. For now, Justin Fishel, Catherine Faulders, I'm Devin Dwyer here in Washington. Thanks for watching.